What's up, everybody? It's the Alex Leak and Friends NFL podcast, back for another week. I'm your host, Alex Leak, and we have a special guest on with us, uh, current ESPN radio host and host of the Under the Hood podcast, Jonathan Hood. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Jonathan.
Alex, as always, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for asking.
Yeah, this is really cool. I'm a big fan. For those of you that don't know, Jonathan Hood is a radio host for ESPN Chicago and has been a radio broadcaster for almost 30 years. He's a two-time Chicagoland Achievement in Radio Award winner, and Hood's shows specialize in post-game fan feedback for Cubs, White Sox, Bulls, and Blackhawk games. So, thanks so much, Jonathan Hood. Let's start at the beginning here. Now, you began your broadcasting career at Kennedy King College as a DJ and sports reporter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Started off, really interested in broadcasting at an early age, Alex, and it's something I really wanted to delve into. I played sports, but I just wanted to get the other end of it and really understand sports from a broadcasting standpoint. And so I was able to go to the Kennedy King College, and my career was able to take off from there. Internships turned into associate producer jobs, which turned into on-air opportunities at the Score in Chicago, as well as now ESPN 1000 for the past 14 years. So it's been a very rewarding career.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's a really nice career you've had. Now, you talked about your internships with like the Tom Scher Morning Show and Ty Wansley Show. Then you were hired as a part-time producer at The Score in 1994. What's it like starting out as a producer? Is there a lot of pressure in that?
Well, the first thing is to be acclimated with the personalities. Starting off as an intern with the Score. The Score was the first all sports radio station with that format, Alex, at the time.
Okay.
And working with Tom Scher, that was the morning show there. It was the Score in its infancy was a sunrise to sunset radio station, which meant the license for the station was only applicable during sunrise and then sunset. It was a small signal, but it was the first all sports station, and so going from an internship to a producer, it's the business, so
Mm-hmm.
it's always future. You just want to be able to learn as you go and grow in the business, and to be able to make something out of yourself.
That's very cool, and you handled it really well. Became very successful at it. Now, when you first started out at The Score, they were, you were doing the producing, and you also asked about trying to do a host as well to fill in some of the time slots. Uh, where did that come from, wanting to become a host as well? That was a lot of, showing aggressiveness and wanting to come up in the station and help them out.
Yeah, I mean, at the time when the Score was AM 820, daytime, nighttime, there was a need to go 24 hours. And so from there, the station went from AM 820 to AM 1160.
Okay.
And at that, there was a need to be able to fill time slots because, when you go from just being daytime, nighttime, and you become a 24-hour format, you're trying to fill time slots. So I told the program director, I said, well, you're going to need weekend talent. Let me be able to help you in that regard. So I went in and told him, I said, there's several slots that I think that I'd be interested in. You can plug me right into those slots, and I can help the station that way. So it's aggressiveness, but it's just common sense to be able to help a station help a station grow. If you feel like you can help a station grow, you will go in and tell them, I can do this, and I will do this.
Yeah, and that's good, and it's good to have that mindset because some people might get in there as a producer and just be content, with that job, and so it's nice to see you want to grow and become a host and look at where you're at now. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I think that should be part of everybody's mindset is to be able to climb the ladder, no matter the business, broadcasting, and whatever business adventure you're interested in. If you're not trying to get to the top, then what's the point of getting there?
Uh,
Why delve and put yourself into a position if you're not trying to grow in that position.
Absolutely. And then you were hired as a full-time executive producer for the Bob Kemp Show, Larry Kotler Show, and Fred Hubner Show. In 1997, you'd be named executive producer for the Dan Bernstein Evening Show, which would later become the Boers and Bernstein Midday Show in 1999. What was that experience like working there?
Well, while I was working at the Score, I also worked at, you mentioned Bob Kemp and the late Larry Kotler and those shows. That was part of One-on-One Sports,
Okay.
which was sports radio network that was heard across the country, and that was the broadcast center was out of Northbrook, Illinois, and so along the lines of ESPN Radio or Fox Sports Radio, One-on-One Sports, which eventually became Sporting News Radio. I'm not even sure what it is now, but nonetheless, at the time it was an all sports radio station. I'm sorry, all sports radio network, and I was working at night doing those shows on the network while I was working at the Score.
Wow.
So I was having local and national experience at the same time. So I was working two jobs at the same time in the mid '90s. So then going from that and then working full time at the Score, being an executive producer for Terry Boers and Dan Bernstein, that was just a change at the radio station where they changed the lineup and they put a veteran, writer like Terry Boers and a young broadcaster like Dan Bernstein together to make Boers and Bernstein, and I was producing on that show with Matt Fishman. So it was an odd pairing at the time, but they were able to parlay that into a legacy because they stayed together for, I believe, 15 years. So I was on the ground floor of that show, the success of that show.
Yeah, and you helped build it and make it into what it is today. That's awesome. And yeah, it shows your hustle. I mean, you working days and nights. That's awesome. Now, then for the last decade, you've been the host of the Jonathan Hood Show on ESPN Chicago, ESPN 1000, where you'd interact with fans like myself, talking Chicago sports postgame. Those were great shows. Chicago fans are very knowledgeable for the most part, but you always set them straight if they're getting a little crazy. What are some of the craziest hot takes you've heard while doing that show?
I just think that there could be fans that are overzealous about teams, but you love the passion.
Yeah.
You think the one thing that always resonates with me is the passion of the sports fan, because if you are inclined to call in and tell your side of the story, your thoughts of your team, where you talk about the most mundane players as being great, at least there's passion, there's an interest there, and I'd rather have interest than no interest at all. So I've heard over my career, Alex, I've heard so many different things from different callers, and for me, it's when you say setting people straight, it's what it is we know that callers are 1% of the audience, because everybody can't call in. They'd love to, but I know everybody can't call in. So we take as many calls that are available. And so we have to understand that there is a much more vast audience listening than they are calling.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening to a show and you hear somebody say something crazy, you know it's crazy. I know it's crazy. So I got to do something. And so that's really all what the business is. It's like, if someone calls in and says something over the top, it's not necessarily to make them look foolish, but just to understand that the listener's listening. So if you think it's crazy and I think it's crazy, somebody better say something. So it should probably be me.
Yeah, and I remember I believe it was the first time I called in. It was when the Bulls were in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Heat, and they had just won Game 1 and were up 1-0 in that series. And someone had called in and said, talking about how great of a coach Tom Thibodeau was, and you were like, well, let's pump the brakes because he's not, quite great yet. And that's when I called in and I was like, Jonathan Hood, you're crazy. Thibodeau is a great coach. And you were like, well, if the Heat go on and win 4 straight games here and the Bulls get eliminated, are we still calling them great? And I was like, that's a good point. And then, of course, that's what happened. So that was a good call.
It's just that I guess as I get older, I'm more patient
Mm-hmm.
because I think that, and again, every sports fan has their right to feel how they feel about their team, because at least there's passion, there's an interest. But I think as I've grown older in the business and as a sports fan, I just want to be able to see a body of work before I label somebody horrible or great or something in between. We need
Mm-hmm.
to see a body of work before we can start putting labels on people, I think.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good perspective. And then you've been a host for ESPN 1000 since 2005, and you now do a national radio show for ESPN called Dickerson and Hood, with friend and ESPN Bears reporter Jeff Dickerson, which will be on later today. And then you also host Under the Hood podcast as well.
Yeah, this will be, I believe, 4 years working with Jeff. Jeff and I have been friends for a long time. When I was at the score in Chicago as a producer, Jeff came in as an intern. I've known Jeff for well over 15 years at both stations, and Jeff had his opportunity to be a national host first. I think that people that worked at ESPN knew that we knew each other, had worked together on ESPN 1000, so they teamed us up to be a national show. And now I believe, I know we log the most hours on the weekends because we work Saturdays and Sundays at 3 o'clock Central Time. And so after Dari and Mel on Saturdays, I think that we are the second most tenured show on ESPN Radio, which is quite the accomplishment when you consider a national platform and Jeff and I working these shows. It's great, and so to be able to have a perspective of not just Chicago but all over the country and on that ESPN app listening to the show, it's a blessing. It's great to be able to lend your perspective on sports across the country on all storylines. And the Under the Hood show that I host on weeknights on ESPN 1000, the local station in Chicago, and the podcast are conjoined. They're together because the podcast is there, so they'll hear my show live if you catch on the podcast. So we know people are busy. It's an on-demand society, Alex. So that's why all my shows are on the Under the Hood show podcast, and that's on Spotify, SoundCloud, Google Play, wherever you download your podcast. Under the Hood with Jonathan Hood, the podcast is there, so people can catch my shows that way if they can't catch them live.
Nice. That's awesome. That's good to have that. And yeah, it's nice to see you get that, national show, the national recognition now. And you and Jeff Dickerson, obviously people see like the chemistry and the great work that you guys do. And so it's awesome to see you guys doing well and really doing a great job with that show.
Well, thank you. We are two different people. Jeff grew up in the northern suburbs, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And we're two different people, but we are able to mesh our personalities together. He sees sports, I think, differently than I in a lot of different aspects. I guess the best way to describe us is the feather and the spike. And I would be the spike in that duo.
Yeah.
As far as how I am, as far as the way I look at sports, and he has more of kind of a lighter perspective on things, and I'm really the guy I like to hammer it home. So I think our styles mesh and they work together, and that's what we've been able to try to accomplish, for a few years now.
That's awesome, and it's great to see people out of Chicago making it national, making it big time. So that's very cool. Let's talk some football, Jay Hood. Preseason week 2 is upon us. The Bears played last night. They fell to 0-2 in the preseason, but I'm not too worried about wins and losses this time of year. Not many starters played. A lot of talk about the young quarterback Mitch Trubisky heading into year 3. High expectations locally, but some low expectations nationally. What's your take on Mitch's development heading into his second year under Matt Nagy in that system.
Well, there's some upside with Mitch Trubisky and some things he has to work on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in the perspective, Alex, that Mitch Trubisky is on the downside, or Mitch Trubisky is a bust, or Mitch Trubisky can't get. So, here's what I saw last year. I thought that Mitch Trubisky at times would look at a receiver like an Allen Robinson, or look at Taylor Gabriel, or whoever who was open, and if those receivers were not open, he'd pull the ball down and run with the football.
Mm-hmm.
And that is dangerous, and also that shows a lack of awareness of checking down to other receivers that are open, and that's just part of the learning curve. I think that Trubisky has room to grow for sure. I think being able to look at other options offensively more quicker in his head, I think will help this offense. I think that the excuses are not there for Trubisky in that he doesn't have enough weapons. When he first came on the field, absolutely, there was nothing for him to work with. But when you have a number of receivers, go-to guys in this offense, and a really solid offensive line, it's up to Trubisky to be able to elevate the game. But I think that Trubisky is good, but still has some things to work on, like any other young quarterback. Remember, he only had 12, 13 games in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Had a full minute games last year. Came in a couple of years ago as kind of reserve, kind of learned a couple of years ago. But this season will tell a greater story than we could ever tell about what Trubisky will bring to the table, because he's got weapons, he's got a good offensive line, he's got a terrific head coach. Now, can he maximize his opportunity?
Yeah, I agree with that. And my biggest thing, I mean, yes, you were right. It's the progression, like looking to reads 3 and 4 instead of just reads like 1 and 2. And I think that will come with like more comfortability. Go ahead.
And for him, it was just one progression.
That's true.
Can't do that.
But I do like his mobility, his ability to like scramble, like if he does feel pressure, and as long as he protects himself or gets out of bounds and doesn't take those hits. That one hit that knocked him out for 2 games last year was costly, so he's got to be careful in that regard. But yes, I do want to see him take that next step, is seeing more reads, and I think it will come with more comfortability, more starts, more experience. I agree with you on that. Now, I mean, yeah, he's taken a lot of heat from, nationally, and I don't necessarily agree with it, just because, like you said, the starts at North Carolina are not a lot of starts there. The rookie year, not a lot around him, not a great system, so I'm just thankful he has that great defense to rely on,
Yeah, I just think that the best teams that will make the mountaintop have balance.
Yeah.
And that historically, watching the Bears is always, even the last time the Bears were in the Super Bowl, strong defense and just good enough offense. And I think that in order for the Bears to get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, you have to have balance. Look at the Eagles a few years ago. Look at the New England Patriots. Look at the teams who are at the top. That's always in the playoffs. Those teams usually have a chance to do things because of balance. We know, you and I both know how strong the defense is from top to bottom. That's even before Khalil Mack got here.
Yeah.
The now is what will Tariq Cohen bring or David Montgomery bring to the offense to help Trubisky? The tight ends and Trey Burton and Adam Shaheen, Allen Robinson, Taylor Gabriel, all the other weapons for the Bears. How will they be able to help elevate the offense? Because here's the thing. I don't know about you, but I think that when you have a defense that is doing their job and then having to do the job for the offense, scoring, doing pick sixes and fumble recoveries and all that stuff, look, the offense got to carry their weight too. Because if when the offense is able to click, now you can look at the Super Bowl and say, you know what, it's an attainable goal.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to be balanced. The offense has to pull its weight. Now, tell me what you think of this. I think a lot hinges on the young guys, the draft picks, the recent draft picks by Pace. by Ryan Pace. It's gonna come down to David Montgomery is a big part, Riley Ridley, Anthony Miller, and Javon Wims. I think those guys, if they can continue to develop and be a big impact, those are going to be big pieces for our offense. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, the one thing I want you to always understand, Alex, and I want you to take this away from this interview, is that you always trust a Georgia player because as a Georgia fan,
Absolutely.
looking for the cream of the crop. Look at my team. Georgia is when you have Riley Ridley, who was a difference maker at Georgia, Javon Wims, who was somewhat of a special teams player, but could really work himself in the mix. You like that. David Montgomery, you mentioned as well. That's just more weapons and more fuel on the fire for Mr. Trubisky. Like Riley Ridley is a young player that I enjoyed watching because I watched every snap of Georgia football every year. So watching Ridley, watching Montgomery out there as well. The big question this week was, will the Bears be able to run the ball or have running backs that can supersede what Jordan Howard did?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to find out because if it's the same production or less than that, then that's going to be a problem. But Mike Davis, David Montgomery, Tariq Cohen, all those guys can help this offense. That's why there are no excuses this year, right? I mean, as long as everyone's healthy, there's no excuses for Mitch or for this offense. It's got to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I agree on the Georgia thing, too. Roquan Smith was my favorite player coming out of that draft 2 years ago, and I think he's a future star, absolutely. So the Georgia guys, I'm with you on that.
It makes me happy as a Georgia fan. It makes me happy that you got this many Georgia players on the Chicago Bears because every time they're drafted, people hit me up on social media like, "Well, can this guy play? Can this guy play?" I'm like, Roquan Smith. I'm never over the top about players, but Roquan Smith has the opportunity, Alex, to be an all-time great with the Bears
Yeah.
at linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
I'm serious because I saw him in college, and I just think he's going to be that cornerstone where you know he's there, he's going to make plays. You might forget about him, but
Yeah.
he's just going to be a solid player for a decade, and it will be an all-time great, especially if he stays healthy.
Yeah, has potential to be another great Bears linebacker. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some media experts have the Bears' defense taking a step back, despite how loaded they are talent-wise, like me and you are talking about. Some have them taking a step back. They say the loss of defensive coordinator Vic Fangio to the Broncos, the loss of safety Adrian Amos to the Packers are going to make the defense not as great as it was last year. I believe they have enough talent to overcome anything that they lost, and I trust new defensive coordinator Chuck Pagano. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I look at the personnel, and the only thing that can really stop the Bears is themselves as far as injury. I mean, before Khalil Mack got here, you already had Akeem Hicks and Eddie Goldman and Danny Trevathan and Leonard Floyd was growing and Kyle Fuller and Eddie Jackson. If it takes a step back from a number standpoint, that's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
They still make top five. If they're
Yeah.
not number one, that's okay. They can be number 3, number 5, and still be impactful players. This defense, no matter who's coaching it, and people look at it based on Vic Fangio not coaching Denver. I think that can sometimes be overrated. If you have a defense in place that can make plays, that can turn the field, get interceptions, punch the ball out like Eddie Jackson, like Kyle Fuller, man, I think that the defensive unit is not getting their full due. No matter who's coaching it, this defense should be able to be, if not number 1, top 5, because of how strong they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I'm, huge fan of Eddie Jackson, Roquan Smith, their continued development. I'm really looking for a big year out of Leonard Floyd. He needs to have one. It's about time. And with Khalil Mack and Akeem Hicks and those guys, he should be seeing single coverage, single blockers. So I want to see a big year out of Floyd. Hopefully that'll happen. Now, tell me, all right, here comes the crazy fan take. I know I'm supposed to be unbiased covering the whole league, but I got the Bears. I mean, they won. They went 5-1 in the division last year. I think they got better offensively. I think David Montgomery's a better fit with the scheme than Jordan Howard was. I take that along with the continued development of the young receivers and Mitch Trubisky. I think this team can sweep the division and win the Super Bowl this year. Is that a crazy take? Am I wild with that one?
No, I think Chicago is one of the favorites for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thing that I would look at though is just the rest of the NFC. I think sometimes we can look at the NFC North and say, well, they could beat the Packers. Well, the Packers have a new coach and trying to implement a new system. Does that work right away, or does that take does that take time? The Minnesota Vikings were just a quarterback away. People thought to get to the Super Bowl. Kirk Cousins is still a very good quarterback. They're able to address their needs on the offensive line. So does that mean that they get better, or do they stay the same? These are questions that we don't know until the bell rings when the season starts, and the Lions are just the Lions. But the thing I look at, though, Alex, is the rest of the NFC, right? And so the Bears are better than the Giants. They're better than the Redskins. Are they better than Dallas? Are they better than Philadelphia? Again, we got to find out.
Mm-hmm.
The Bears are better than Carolina? They're better than the Bucks? They're better than Atlanta, maybe.
Yeah.
But are they better than the Saints and Drew Brees, who felt like they got screwed last year? Right, that they got better offensively. I think that their defense is going to take a step forward this year. So are the Bears as good or better than the Saints? The Bears got. You take a look at the Rams last year, the representative of the NFC. They take a step back, or do they take a step forward and finally win it? The Seahawks, I think the Bears are better than the Seahawks, especially defensively. So there's still a few teams that the Bears have to concern themselves with as far as the Super Bowl. Now, again, if everything works well, why can't the Bears win the Super Bowl? But you got to remember, there's at least four teams are looking at that the Bears have to overcome in the playoffs. Is Trubisky ready for that? Got to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. And all you can really ask for is a chance, is to take care of your business in the regular season. The best way to do it is to take care of the division, win the division, and all you can ask for is a chance in the playoffs. Those matchups are always so even. You look at the game last year against the Eagles, that was such a good game. But going back to that game came down to our kicking, which was a problem all last year, and it seems to still be a problem. We still haven't figured it out. You look at, Elliott Fry looked a little bit better in the first preseason game than Eddie Pinheiro. Then last night, Pinheiro looked better than Fry, making 2 field goals. Is this kicking issue going to be a problem all year again this year?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that Pinheiro said that it seems like all my kicks are scrutinized, and that turned me off as a Bears fan. And I'm thinking, oh, so if you don't like the scrutiny now, imagine if you miss kicks like we saw last year.
Yeah.
If you don't like the scrutiny and you have a problem with it now in camp in preseason, then maybe you should be on the football team. I'd rather take Elliott Fry seriously, because if you are already bitching about how you're being covered, like, oh, every kick, if I miss a kick, then I'm the worst. Well, if you don't have enough thick skin as a kicker to deal with that, then maybe you should be on the football team.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%, and I've been leaning Elliott Fry this training camp and this preseason, and looking at Elliott Fry's kicks in the AAF, he did pretty well there too. So I would say I'm leaning him. I think that he's probably the best option, but is he reliable? And when the pressure's on, we'll have to wait and see. But I hope we figure it out, because I would hate to see it come down to the kicker again and lose a big game because of that.
Absolutely.
Now, I used to call all the time and talk to you about, the Jay Cutler days. And, could we get the Super Bowl with Cutler, and could he lead us to the promised land? And I have this debate all the time with Bears fans that I know. Do you think that the Jay Cutler trade, and the time that Cutler was there with the Bears is looked at as success or a mistake? Because we had success with Kyle Orton and a dominant defense and run game. So do you think that in the end, was it better to trade for Cutler, or do you think we could have stuck it out with Orton and been just as successful, if not more?
Well, in hindsight, no, but I think you had to upgrade the position. You
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have a little velocity, someone with a stronger arm. The Bears had been bereft of a quality quarterback for a while. They thought they were getting that with Jay Cutler, and I don't, I don't, I don't think the Bears regret that move. Um, I think there was Cutler fatigue at some point, but I think that that was the right move for the right time because you thought you had a quarterback in place that didn't was just okay with Denver. You thought maybe you with the right players that he'd be able to develop the system, and it just didn't work out. But that's the risk you take as a general manager. You try to do what's best for the team, and maybe the limitations would have been on Orton like it was for Cutler. Who knows? Because to me, it's more than just a quarterback. It's about the personnel. I don't think neither one of those guys really had really difference making, Super Bowl making personnel to get the Bears over the top. So
Yeah.
to me, it's beyond the quarterback, it's the personnel as well.
Yeah, and I would have liked. I mean, I think the biggest coaching move that we made that could have gone the other way was the Trestman hire, and I think that if we had gone Bruce Arians there, Cutler's success could have been a lot more, and we could have got that championship with Bruce Arians. The Trestman era obviously didn't work out, but I think that Arians to go with Cutler having like Matt Forte, Martellus Bennett, Alshon Jeffrey, Brandon Marshall, I feel like we could have gotten more success out of that. I couldn't stand the Trestman move, but what can you do?
That's water under the bridge now.
Yep. Hopefully Trubisky can deliver it for us. I can't wait for the season. Week 1, we're gonna start out the year against the Packers. I can't wait for that game. You think we take the opener against the Green Bay on Thursday night?
I do. I do. I still think that the Packers have some things to work on offensively. Um, Maybe some of the things that Aaron Rodgers has said has been a little bit overblown as far as his relationship with the new head coach.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that even for Green Bay, uh, they might have some things that they're going to work on. But I think the Bears will have some momentum. I think that I can see it being a very close game. But I can see the Bears winning the opener. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I hope so. I can't wait. Like I said, I got a sweep in the division, so we better win that week 1 game. But well, thanks for coming on, Jay Hood. It was fun talking with you, and best of luck. Keep up the great work. You're doing a great job out there.
Well, I appreciate your support over the years, and Dickerson and I will continue our shows on ESPN Radio on the weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays, and doing a great, it's just a blessing to be able to do both the local show on ESPN 1000 in Chicago and doing the national show at Jeff Dickerson. So I'm having a ball, having fun, and hope everyone stays entertained.
Yeah, we're loving it. Keep up the great work. Keep representing Chicago well, and I'll be tuning in. So thanks so much, and have a great day, sir.
Alex, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you. Thank you.